Welcome in, everyone. Today we are doing something a bit special. We are structuring this as a critique review format, specifically targeted at educators and students, mostly in that grade 9 through 14 range.
Yeah, we're really digging into a major cornerstone of classic literature and historical fiction today.
Exactly. So picture this for a second. A mild-mannered, 30-something daughter of a New England minister writes a novel. And then, a decade later, the sitting United States president supposedly greets her by saying, so you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war.
Which is just a wild quote. I mean, the fact that Abraham Lincoln's remark is taken seriously by historians really tells you everything you need to know about the sheer geopolitical impact of Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yeah, it's massive. So for our source stack today, we are pulling from biographical notes on Harriet Beecher Stowe, the historical context from 1852, and of course, extensive excerpts from the actual text itself.
And our mission here isn't just to recap a famous plot for you. We really want to critique the mechanics of this literature. We're looking at how Stowe basically womanized the psychology of her era to dismantle the moral justifications of an entire economic system.
Right, the deep character studies she used to trap her readers.
Exactly. And also the history of how her most heroic character was later mutated into a modern slur.
It's such a crucial critique for students to grasp, especially since this book sold like 300,000 copies in its first year, which was just unheard of back then. Leo Tolstoy even called it a great work of literature.
To understand the spark that created that kind of phenomenon, you really have to look at the geography of Stowe's life. I mean, she was born in Connecticut into the prominent Beecher family.
And they had this fierce, ingrained drive to improve humanity, right?
Yeah, very much so. But the real turning point came when she moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. That geographic shift put her right on the fault line of American history.
Because Cincinnati sits directly across the Ohio River from Kentucky.
Right, a slave state. So for years, she lived right on that border. She witnessed firsthand the misery and desperation of enslaved people who had, risked everything to cross the water into a free state.
The trauma of the system was just unfolding practically in her backyard.
It was. But the catalyst that actually pushed her to pick up a pen wasn't just local observation. It was a massive federal legislative shift, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850.
Oh, man. Yeah, that law completely changed the mechanics of complicity in the United States.
You really did.
Because before 1850, a lot of people in the North could pretend the institution of slavery was just this distant Southern problem. They could claim their hands were clean.
Right, but the Fugitive Slave Act eradicated that moral loophole completely. The law legally deputized everyday citizens in free states.
Wow.
Yeah, it compelled Northerners to actively assist in the capture and return of escaped slaves. And if they didn't, they faced severe federal fines and imprisonment.
So you could no longer just look the other way.
Exactly. The federal government was forcing everyday people to become cogs in the machinery of slavery. So Stowe felt this profound, burning moral obligation to expose the reality of the system to a public that was suddenly legally bound to uphold it.
Wait, but she was a white woman from New England? Why wouldn't the public just write this off as, fabricated Northern propaganda, especially from someone who had no business discussing the inner workings of a plantation?
Oh, critics absolutely tried to dismiss it as sensationalist fiction. The pushback from pro-slavery factions was vicious. I mean, they accused her of inventing atrocities out of thin air.
So how did she counter that?
She leaned heavily on real-life observations, Underground Railroad accounts, and stories from people she knew in Cincinnati. And to completely silence her detractors, she actually published a massive follow-up volume in 1853.
Oh, right. A key to Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yes. It was essentially a heavily annotated bibliography. It was filled with court records, legal documents, and personal accounts that substantiated the graphic reality she had depicted in the novel.
She proved her fiction was entirely factual.
Exactly. Which brings us to the book itself.
Yeah, and you would assume a book designed to expose such horrific realities would open with a cartoonish monster, right? Like a villain to immediately make the reader hate the institution.
But Stowe takes the exact opposite route. She starts the novel on the Shelby farm in Kentucky, introducing us to Mr. Shelby. And he is widely regarded as a quote-unquote good, mild, and respectable master.
Which is such a brilliant rhetorical move. Opening with a seemingly benevolent slave owner is probably the most devastating choice she makes in the entire text.
It really is. Because Mr. Shelby treats the people on his farm relatively well. He allows them to marry, to live in family units, and to practice their religion.
But he has a fatal flaw. He's fallen into severe financial debt.
Right. And because the law classifies the people on his farm not as humans but as property, he is forced to liquidate his assets to pay his creditors.
It's so chilling.
He strikes a deal with a crude, ruthless trader named Haley to sell a young boy named Harry and his most faithful, trusted man, Uncle Tom.
For the students listening, think about this like a modern corporate debt restructuring. A business is failing, the bank comes calling, and the executives have to liquidate assets to balance the ledger.
That's a great analogy.
But instead of auctioning off office furniture or a fleet of delivery trucks, the assets being traded to balance the books are human beings with families.
And the psychological devastation this causes really exposes the central thesis of the novel. I mean, Mrs. Shelby is entirely horrified when she discovers what her husband has done.
Right, because she considers herself a devout Christian.
Exactly. She's tried her best to impart morals, duty, and family values to the people they enslave. So when she realizes Tom and little Harry are going to be sold down the river, her entire worldview shatters.
She admits she thought she could gild it over.
Yes, she cries out that it is a sin to hold a slave under their laws. She realizes her personal kindness is completely irrelevant.
The law makes benevolence impossible.
That is exactly what Stowe is arguing. The system of slavery corrupts everyone it touches, regardless of individual intentions. A kind master is an illusion because systemic debt and the legal classification of humans as capital can tear a child from its mother in a single afternoon.
Personal morality just cannot exist within a framework built on treating humans as commodities.
Right, and so news of the impending sale inevitably leaks out to the enslaved community on the Shelby farm. This forces the characters into these impossible, terrifying choices.
And the narrative fractures here into two brilliantly contrasted paths, right? Two ways of dealing with absolute trauma. The first path is flight, embodied by Eliza, the mother of the young boy, Harry.
Yes. Eliza discovers her child is going to be handed over to the trader the very next morning, and her reaction is immediate, visceral, physical resistance. She grabs Harry in the dead of night and flees toward the Ohio River.
And the scene of her escape is arguably the most famous and cinematic moment in 19th century American literature.
Absolutely.
She reaches the river, but is frozen over and breaking apart into these massive, unstable ice floes. With Haley and the slave catchers literally closing in behind her, she acts on pure, desperate, maternal adrenaline.
It's an incredible sequence.
She leaps onto the floating ice, slipping, bleeding, jumping from jagged chunk to jagged chunk to cross the freezing water into Ohio.
And what gives that sequence so much power is that it's grounded in documented events. Stowe is highlighting the raw, undeniable power of the maternal bond.
A human connection that the legal system of slavery tried to pretend didn't exist.
Precisely. Eliza's frantic leap across the ice forces the reader to recognize her profound humanity and the lengths she will go to protect her child.
But then, back on the Shelby farm, Tom is presented with the exact same terrifying reality.
Right. He finds out he is being sold down the river to the Deep South.
Which everyone understands is essentially a death sentence of grueling plantation labor. Yet, when offered the chance to run, Tom refuses. He chooses to stay and be sold. And to a modern listener, Tom's refusal to escape feels incredibly frustrating. We want him to cross the ice with Eliza. We want him to fight. Why would Stowe frame passive acceptance as a heroic trait?
Reframing Tom really requires us to look at the theological framework of the 1850s. Tom is not exercising subservience. He is exercising a profound, Christ-like moral agency.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, Tom calculates that if he runs away, Mr. Shelby's debt will still need to be paid. The ruin of the farm would mean the entire enslaved community, including Tom's wife, Aunt Chloe, and all of his children, would be sold off in his place.
Wow.
So Tom makes a deliberate, active choice to absorb the blow to protect his family and his community from being destroyed.
So it isn't weakness at all. It is the ultimate sacrifice. He is laying down his own life for his community.
Exactly, which makes the modern perception of his name so tragic.
Right, because calling someone an Uncle Tom today is a severe slur. It means you're calling them a subservient sellout, someone who betrays their own people to appease the power structure.
Right.
So how did a character written as an unbreakable, self-sacrificing martyr turn into a derogatory punchline?
That inversion is one of the greatest literary injustices in history, really. And the mechanism behind it boils down to intellectual property laws, or rather, the lack of them at the time.
She didn't have copyright control.
None. She had no control over theatrical adaptations of her novel. So after the Civil War, traveling stage productions known as Tom shows swept across the country.
Oh, I've heard of these.
Yeah, these were often essentially minstrel shows designed for white audiences who wanted the emotional entertainment of the story without the radical, challenging abolitionist message.
They stripped the story of its teeth.
They systematically erased Tom's fierce dignity, his quiet defiance, and his powerful religious strength. The stage producers turned him into a shuffling, compliant, simplistic caricature.
That's awful.
It is. The slur you hear today comes directly from those garish, racist stage plays that toured for decades, completely burying Stowe's original character. Because in the text, Tom is a man of unyielding principle who never once compromises his soul.
Keeping that original context in mind is so crucial as we follow these two divergent paths. So Eliza runs north, into the supposed safety of the Free States. But Stowe makes it abundantly clear that the South is not her only target.
No, not at all.
Eliza's journey exposes the rampant political hypocrisy of the North.
Right, because Eliza, exhausted and clutching her child, eventually arrives at the Ohio home of Senator Byrd. And Senator Byrd is a politician who has just returned from the Capitol where he voted in favor of the Fugitive Slave Act.
Right.
Before Eliza knocks on the door, he is literally sitting in his comfortable parlor arguing with his wife that it is their patriotic and Christian duty to send escaped slaves back to their masters to preserve the glorious Union.
He's defending the abstract logic of the law.
Exactly.
But then a weeping, shivering mother is standing in his actual kitchen. The tough, law and order politician is suddenly faced with the human reality of the legislation he just championed.
And he instantly breaks his own law.
Yeah. He puts Eliza in his personal carriage, drives her through the treacherous mud in the dead of night, and risks his own freedom to help her escape to a safe house.
Senator Byrd's sudden reversal perfectly illustrates Stowe's critique. Abstract political logic completely disintegrates when it is confronted with actual human suffering.
It is easy to legislate cruelty from a distance.
But facing the victims of that legislation changes the moral calculus entirely.
And the critique of complicity gets even sharper when we look at Tom's journey. As he is taken down the Mississippi River, his path intersects with Augustine St. Clair, a wealthy New Orleans aristocrat, and St. Clair's cousin, Miss Ophelia, who is visiting from Vermont.
Yes, and Miss Ophelia serves as the avatar for a very specific type of Northern hypocrisy. She considers herself a staunch abolitionist, she talks endlessly about the duties of Christians to oppose slavery, and she donates to missionary causes.
But she is essentially the 1850s version of an NIMBY activist, right? Not in my backyard.
That's a perfect way to describe her.
She conceptually hates the institution of slavery, but she harbors a visceral, deeply ingrained prejudice against black people.
Yes. At one point, St. Clair lets his angelic young daughter, Eva, sit next to Tom and hug him because Tom is singing hymns to her. And Ophelia is physically repulsed.
Wow.
She scolds St. Clair, completely unable to handle the physical proximity. She wants enslaved people to be freed, sure, but only if they are sent away to Africa, entirely out of her sight.
And St. Clair, despite being a slaveholder, is perfectly positioned to call out her cognitive dissonance.
He really is. He points out her absolute hypocrisy, noting that she loathes the enslaved people as she would a toad, yet she is indignant at their wrongs. She doesn't want them abused, but she wants absolutely nothing to do with them.
Stowe uses Ophelia to indict the Northern reader who feels morally superior but refuses to confront their own deep-seated bigotry.
Which brings us to Augustine St. Clair. He buys Tom and treats him with relative kindness, but St. Clair's internal psychology is incredibly complex.
Yeah, he possesses vast wealth built entirely on enslaved labor, but he suffers no illusions about his own nobility.
Not at all. St. Clair's monologues contain some of the sharpest economic critiques in the novel. He openly admits to Ophelia that slavery is a morally bankrupt, loathsome system.
He just lays it all out there.
He strips away all the paternalistic Southern myths and defines slavery purely as the appropriation of the lower class, body and bone, soul and spirit, for the use and convenience of the capitalists. He knows the foundation of his entire life is an atrocity.
Yet he sits in his parlor, drinking wine, making witty philosophical observations, and doing absolutely nothing to stop it.
Exactly. He attributes his inaction to sheer laziness. He jokes that if it weren't for laziness, he'd be an angel.
That's so dark.
St. Clair represents the paralyzed intellectual. He sees the evil clearly, but the convenience and luxury provided by the system are too comfortable to abandon.
So Stowe really traps the reader between these two cousins. She forces you to ask, are you Miss Ophelia, claiming the moral high ground while harboring intense personal prejudice? Or Are you St. Clair, fully aware of systemic injustice but too comfortable to actually disrupt it?
Right. And St. Clair's intellectual musings are a luxury. But that luxury violently shatters when he dies in a sudden accident before he can fulfill his promise to legally free Tom.
Right. Without St. Clair's protection, the fragile safety net just vanishes. Tom is thrown into the absolute darkest depths of the American slave system. He is sold at auction to a man named Simon Legree.
And the shift from St. Clair to Simon Legree is the transition from theoretical evil to absolute unrestrained brutality. Legree operates a massive plantation in the remote Red River region.
He strips away any remaining pretense of civilization or paternalism.
Completely. He represents the stark, logical conclusion of a system that legally defines human beings as equipment.
The source notes detail how Stowe based Legree on accounts of real planters whose entire business model was designed to grind humans into dust for maximum agricultural output.
Legree explicitly tells Tom that he doesn't bother keeping his workers healthy. He dyes them, works them until they drop, and buys more.
It is literally an industrial slaughterhouse. So if Tom was completely compliant before, how does he survive under a master whose only language is absolute brutality?
Well, this is where Tom's faith is tested against absolute physical dominion. Legree doesn't just want Tom's labor. He demands total subjugation of Tom's soul. He orders Tom to take a whip and brutally flog a fellow enslaved woman to prove his obedience to the plantation's hierarchy.
And under the threat of horrific violence, Tom finally refuses an order.
Yes, this is the moment that completely invalidates the modern slur we discussed earlier. Tom physically disobeys his master.
Wow.
He stands before Legree and declares that while his physical body may have been purchased, his soul belongs to God. He offers to take the whipping himself, but he absolutely refuses to commit a cruelty against another human being.
Legree holds the power of life and death, but he discovers he cannot break Tom's moral fortitude.
Right. And Tom's unbreakable spirit actually begins to drive the tyrannical Legree to madness. The master is haunted by his own sins, terrified by superstitions, and enraged by the unyielding strength of Tom's faith.
But Legree eventually commands his overseers to beat Tom to death.
He does. But even as his body is destroyed, Tom emerges not as a broken victim, but as a triumphant martyr. In his final moments, he forgives the very men who are killing him, echoing the crucifixion.
The brutal system succeeds in destroying his physical form, but it fails utterly to conquer his humanity.
Exactly.
When you step back and look at the intense emotional weight of Tom's death, you really have to consider the mechanics of how Stowe delivered this message. She didn't just write a tragic story. She deployed a very specific psychological tool known as sentimental culture.
Right. In the 1850s, weeping over literature wasn't seen as a sign of weakness. It was widely considered a profound Christian moral exercise.
Oh, interesting.
A reader experiencing deep, empathetic grief over a character's suffering was proving their soul was sensitive to God's truth. Stowe understood this cultural mechanism perfectly.
She deliberately engineered the narrative to force her white northern readers to feel familial grief for enslaved characters.
Exactly. By making her readers mourn for Tom and root for Eliza, she used their own religious and emotional frameworks to corner them. If they felt the humanity of these characters, their own faith demanded that they view the institution of slavery as a sin against God.
She showed that as long as the law allows human beings to be classified as property, the system will inevitably produce Simon Legrees.
And it will corrupt St. Clair's, the Miss Ophelias, and the Senator Byrds along the way. Stowe explicitly warned that allowing the law to classify humans as capital creates a moral rot that infects the entire nation.
Today, from the comfort of the present, it is incredibly easy to look back and judge the characters in this novel. We all like to assume we would be the ones braving the ice with Eliza or breaking the law alongside Senator Byrd.
It is always easier to be righteous in hindsight.
Right.
But if Harriet Beecher Stowe were alive right now, examining the invisible supply chains, the global labor practices, and the systemic inequalities that power our modern consumer economy, well, what completely legal, widely accepted mechanism of human labor would she write a novel about today?
That is a phenomenal question for the students out there to consider.
And more importantly, if you were reading that modern novel, which character would you actually be?
That is a question that lingers long after you close the book. The massive, complex machinery of commerce we accept as normal is always fueled by someone. It is up to us to keep asking who is paying the price for the output we enjoy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you.